going to say something that might sting a little. When you tell me that your small business has a culture problem, I don't really believe you. Not because culture doesn't matter, it absolutely does, but because 9 times out of 10, what small businesses call a culture problem is actually an accountability problem, and it's one they've been avoiding. Here's what I mean. You've got someone who misses deadlines, but they're going through a lot, so you let it slide. You've got a leader who doesn't give feedback, but they're nice and they're well liked, so you work around it. You've got standards that exist on paper, but don't actually get enforced because enforcing them feels uncomfortable. And over time, what happens? The people who do show up, who do deliver, who do hold the line, they start to wonder why they're working so damn hard when others aren't held to the same standard. That's not a culture problem. That's an accountability problem. So today, I want to walk through how to spot the difference, why we confuse the two, and what it actually takes to fix it. It's an easy fix, but an uncomfortable one. Culture has become this catch-all term for anything that feels off in a business. Morale is low, culture problem. People aren't engaged, culture problem. Turnover is high, must be a culture problem. And here's why that's dangerous. When you label something as culture, a culture problem, it feels big, abstract, and really, really hard to solve. You start thinking you need to do team building exercises, update your values, or bring in some consultant to fix the vibe. But accountability, that's really specific. It's actionable, and it's on you as a leader. So let me give you a framework to tell the difference. A culture problem is when your stated values and your actual behaviors are completely misaligned across the board. It's systemic. It's not about one person or one situation. It's about what the organization rewards, tolerates, and reinforces at scale. You see, if you tolerate behavior once, you've endorsed it. If you tolerate it twice, you've normalized it. And if you tolerate it long enough, it becomes your culture. An accountability problem is when standards exist but aren't consistently enforced. It's when expectations are very clear but consequences are inconsistent. It's when someone drops the ball and nothing happens. Or worse, someone drops a ball and somebody else picks it up and that becomes your new normal. Most of what gets labeled as culture is actually the second one. And the reason we avoid naming it is because fixing accountability requires us to have really uncomfortable conversations. We have to make hard decisions and we have to stop protecting people from the consequences of their own choices. Here's a question I ask clients all the time. Do you have people in leadership roles who are well-liked but completely ineffective? And here's what usually happens. There's this long pause, and then they say, well, they mean well, and that's the tell. Because when you prioritize someone being nice over someone being effective, you're telling the rest of your team that performance is optional. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying leaders need to be jerks. That's not what I'm advocating for. But being kind and being accountable, they are not mutually exclusive. You can care about someone deeply and still hold them to a standard. You can have empathy for what they're going through and still expect them to deliver on their commitments or communicate when they can't. The problem is that a lot of leaders confuse empathy with enabling. They think, I don't want to add to their stress, or they're dealing with a lot right now, I'll give them a pass. And in the short term, that feels compassionate. But in the long term, what you've done is create a 2-tiered system. One standard for the people you're protecting, and another for everyone else who's quietly picking up the slack. That breeds resentment. It creates inequity, and eventually your best people leave, not because the culture is actually toxic, but because the lack of accountability is exhausting. I've seen this in my own business. Early on, I had someone on my team who was great with clients, had a really good heart, but consistently struggled with follow through. And I kept making excuses for them because they were going through a lot personally, and I know they meant well. What I didn't see at the time was how much that was costing everyone else. Other team members were covering their work, deadlines were being adjusted, and slowly the message I was sending was it's okay to underperform as long as you mean well. That's not culture, that's me avoiding accountability because it was uncomfortable. Another way this shows up is when standards exist, but they're treated like guidelines or suggestions instead of requirements. You say meetings start on time, but they don't. You say feedback should be timely, but it's inconsistent. You say client work gets reviewed before it goes out, but then sometimes it just doesn't. And every time a standard slips without consequence, you're teaching people that your standards are negotiable. So here's the thing. Your team is always watching what you tolerate, not what you say you value. If you say responsiveness matters, but you don't address the person who takes 3 days to reply to internal messages, you've just told everyone that responsiveness doesn't actually matter. If you say we deliver quality work, but you let something subpar go out the door because we were in a rush, you've just redefined your quality standard. This is where leaders get really frustrated and they ask, why doesn't anyone take this seriously? And the answer is because you don't, not in a way that has any real teeth. In my business, we learned this the hard way with our service desk. We had SLAs, clear expectations about response times and turnaround on client requests, but there were team members who would blow right past those SLAs and nothing would happen. So other team members started wondering, why am I busting my ass to hit these deadlines if it doesn't actually matter? We had to get really clear. The SLA was not a suggestion, it was the standard. And if you can't meet it, you escalate before the deadline, not after. That required us to have some really direct conversations. It required us to stop making exceptions every time someone had a reason. And it required my leaders to be okay with the discomfort of holding the line. But once we did, execution improved almost immediately. Not because people suddenly cared more, but because the expectations were finally real. So this is the big one, and it's where most leaders trip up, myself included. You've got someone who's underperforming, and instead of addressing it directly with them, you start managing around them. I have been so guilty of setting a bar, realizing an employee is not meeting it, and rather than hold them accountable to the bar, I lower it. I stop giving them critical projects or maybe assign their work to someone else, create workarounds so the business doesn't suffer, so it keeps moving. And in your mind, when we do this, we think we're being strategic. We're keeping things going, keeping the business going. And here's what we're actually doing. Protecting that person from the natural consequences of their performance. And in doing so, you're quietly punishing everyone else. Because now the high performers are carrying extra weight, they're picking up the slack, and they know exactly what's happening. This is exhausting to sustain, and it's why good people leave small businesses. Not because they didn't like the work, not because they didn't believe in the mission, but because they got tired of watching underperformance get tolerated while they were expected to deliver at a higher standard. I had to confront this in my own leadership. There was a point where I was spending more energy managing around someone's gaps than I was investing in developing the people who were actually showing up. And one day, one of my top performers said to me, I don't understand why I'm being asked to take on more when this person isn't being asked to step up. And that hit me really hard because she was right. I was enabling underperformance in the name of being supportive, and it was costing me the trust of my best people. So I had to make a choice. I had to have a really hard conversation or lose the people I couldn't afford to lose. I chose the hard conversation, and to be honest, it didn't go the way that I hoped. That person ultimately wasn't able or willing to meet the standard, and we parted ways. But here's what happened. After that, the team really exhaled. Performance improved, morale actually went up, not because someone left, but because accountability was finally consistent. Culture isn't what you say in your value statement. Culture is what you tolerate. It's what you let slide when you're tired, when it's awkward, when someone has a good excuse. It's the gap between what you say matters and what you actually enforce. And if there's a gap, people will default to what you tolerate, not what you say you want. So if you're sitting there thinking, we have a culture problem, I want you to ask a different set of questions. Number one, where am I allowing standards to slip because addressing it feels uncomfortable? Number two, who am I protecting from the consequences of their own performance? And number three, what behaviors am I tolerating that I would never accept from a new hire? Because I can almost guarantee you the issue isn't that your culture is broken. It's that accountability isn't consistent. And the fix isn't a retreat or a rebrand. It's you as a leader deciding that the discomfort of holding people accountable is worth it. Because the alternative is losing the people you can't afford to lose. If you're listening to this and thinking, I've been avoiding this, then you are not alone. This is very common in what I see in small businesses. Every leader I know, including me, has avoided accountability conversations because they're really hard and they're uncomfortable. But here's what I've learned. The cost of avoiding them is always higher than the cost of having them. Every time you let something slide, you're making a withdrawal from the trust account of your high performers. And eventually, that account runs out. So my challenge to you is this: identify one place where you're tolerating behaviors or performance that doesn't match your stated standards. And then address it. Not next quarter, not when it gets worse, right now. Have the conversation, set the expectation, and then follow through on the consequence if needed. Because accountability isn't about being harsh, it's about being fair. It's about creating an environment where people know what's expected, where the standards are real, and where showing up actually matters. That's not a culture you talk about. That's a culture you build through consistent action. If you want help thinking through what that looks like in your business, how to have those conversations, those really uncomfortable ones, how to set up systems that make accountability easier. This is all part of your HR infrastructure, how to rebuild trust with your team. You can book time with me directly. That link is below. Because small businesses don't fail because they lack heart or culture. They fail because they lack the infrastructure to scale. And accountability is part of that infrastructure. Let's build that.